Word is coming from Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13. That's the book of Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13. And it reads, Now that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I have instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ, which strengthened me. So the book of Philippians, it is considered to be the book of joy in suffering. The book of Philippians talks a lot about suffering. This was one of Paul's epistles that he wrote to the church at Philippi from prison. So the book of Philippians was written by Paul, and he was in prison when he wrote to the church in Philippi. And it's considered the book of joy in suffering. Paul says in Philippians chapter 4, in the verses that I just read, 11 through 13, he says he know how to be content in any situation. He know what it means to have plenty. He know what it means to be in lack. But still, through that, he can do all things through Christ who strengthens him. And a lot of times when we hear that verse, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I don't think oftentimes we really know the situation that Paul was in when he wrote that letter. He was in prison. He was suffering, I assume, but through his suffering, there was joy in his suffering. He knew how to have joy in spite of the situation that he was in. And this, his letter, the letter to the Philippi church, to the Philippians, was considered one of his most joyous letters that he wrote to throughout all the churches that he wrote to, because the Philippians, they loved Paul. They took care of Paul. They sent Paul money when he was in prison. So he really had this heartfelt appreciation and love for the Philippians. So what Paul is saying here in Philippians chapter 4, that although you may be in a situation where you're suffering, because the Bible, all through the Bible, talks about suffering, but a lot of times we fail to teach on suffering. We fail to teach on what it means to suffer and suffer well. Just because we're suffering doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. Just because we're suffering doesn't mean that God is not with us. Just because we're suffering doesn't mean that God does not know what we're going through and that he's not with us through the suffering. Because Paul said, I forget what verse it was, or it might have been David. He says, although I'm going through this suffering, he's not asking God to remove the suffering from him, to remove the pain. He just asks that God be in the suffering with him. And I think that was David. But the book of Philippians talks about suffering, how to have joy in suffering, because we are going to go through suffering. Jesus said, in this life you will have troubles, but I have overcome the world. Take heart, I have overcome everything. So although you may have some troubles, you may be going through some suffering, you may be going through a little pain, just know that God is there with you through it all, and that you are going to make it. You're going to get through it. Paul says, I know what it feels like, what it means to be have plenty and to be in need, to have lack. So whether you're right now in a situation where you have more than enough, God has blessed you with more than enough, or you may be in your season where you may be in need. You may be in need of a financial breakthrough. You may be in need of a healing from God. You may be in need of something from God, but just know that there is joy in your suffering. There is joy in your pain, and this too shall pass. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Amen. So be encouraged and be reminded that Paul was in prison when he wrote this letter, and he still had the joy of the Lord. And the Bible, it says, the joy of the Lord is my strength. So Paul leaned on the Lord's strength to get him through, and he came out better than he was before, and he knew how to be content in all situations. So I just stopped by to encourage you today. Whatever situation you find yourself in need of today, Learn how to be content. Learn how to be content in the Lord, because God is with you. God is going to get you through this, and it's not the end. Amen. So be encouraged and have joy in the Lord. Y'all take care and be blessed.